7 years. 7 whole years. And I never saw it. I lived beside him, studied beside him, shared every stupid Tuesday night and every quiet Sunday morning with him, and I never once looked close enough to see what was right there the entire time. That is the part that stays with me now. Not the shock of what happened, not the moment everything changed, but the fact that I missed it for 7 years and called it normal. My name is Roger, and this story starts with my own blindness. Colton Gray came into my life the way most important things do, quietly, without announcement, without any signal that this person would eventually become the one person I could not picture my days without. We met freshman year, same floor of the same dormitory, both too stubborn to ask anyone for directions and both standing in front of the wrong classroom for a full 10 minutes before we figured it out. He looked at me, I looked at him, we both started laughing at the same time. That was it. That was the whole beginning. Two idiots lost outside a sociology lecture they were already late for. After that, we were just always together. Not in a dramatic, announced way. It was more like gravity, effortless and constant. We ended up in the same apartment building after freshman year, same friend groups, same late-night food orders, same habit of staying up too long talking about things that mattered and things that absolutely did not. Colton was the kind of person who remembered details without trying. He knew I took one sugar in my coffee, that I hated the sound of people chewing near me, that when I went quiet for too long it meant something was actually wrong. He knew these things not because I told him but because he paid attention. He always paid attention. I told myself that was just what good friendship looked like. Looking back now, I think I told myself a lot of things. The new semester started and that was when Weston Cole walked into my Tuesday afternoon class and sat in the empty seat 2 rows to my left. He was easy to talk to. The kind of person who made conversation feel light, no effort required. He had this dry, unhurried humor that reminded me of old films, and it turned out he actually loved old films. Specifically old horror. So did I. We ended up staying after class one afternoon talking about a 1970s film we had both seen, and by the end of the week we were grabbing lunch together between lectures. Simple, easy, nothing complicated about it. I mentioned Weston to Colton that same evening. Casually, the way I would mention anything, we were sitting on the rooftop of our building, our spot, the place we had claimed since sophomore year. 2 old folding chairs and a view of the city that was nothing impressive but somehow always felt like ours. I said something like, "Met someone new in my Tuesday class, pretty easy to hang around." Colton nodded and said something back. The conversation moved on. I did not think twice about it. But then I started noticing things. Small things first. The kind you brush off one at a time, but that start to gather weight when you line them all up together. The first time I was reading a message from Weston and laughed at something he said. I glanced up and caught Colton looking at me from across the kitchen counter. Not an angry look, not an obvious look, just a look that lasted half a second too long before he turned back to whatever he was doing. I filed it away as nothing. Then there was the afternoon I made plans with Weston to use the library study rooms. We had a presentation coming up and wanted quiet space. I mentioned it to Colton while getting my bag together. He said sure and went back to his laptop, but he was unusually quiet for the rest of that evening. Not cold, not rude, just pulled back in a way I could not point to directly. I asked if he was okay. He said he was tired. I believed him because it was easier to believe him. It went on like that for about 2 weeks. These small, deniable moments that I kept explaining away. Colton had always been a little private with his moods. A little reserved in how he showed when something was bothering him. That was just who he was. So when I felt a slight shift in him, I kept reaching for the simplest explanation. He was stressed. He was tired. Work was heavy. I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. The evening it became impossible to ignore started like every other evening between us. We were on the rooftop. The city was doing its usual thing below. Noise, lights, movement that never quite stopped. Colton had his phone in his hand but was not really looking at it. I was talking about something, a lecture I think, or maybe a film I had watched the night before, and I noticed that he was not really tracking what I was saying. His eyes were somewhere else. His jaw had that particular set it got when he was holding something in. I stopped talking mid-sentence. "Hey, where are you?" He looked at me then, directly, and said, "Do you have to spend that much time with him?" I did not pretend to not know who he meant. "Weston is my friend." "I know that." "Then, what is the actual question, Colton?" He looked away, back at the city. His thumb moved once against the edge of his phone case. This small, restless motion that told me he was not as calm as he was trying to look. Forget it. It came out wrong. It came out like something, I said. Just not sure what. He did not answer that, and I did not push. We sat there for another 20 minutes and talked about something else entirely. Some television show one of us had been watching. And on the surface, everything was fine. We came back downstairs at the same time, said goodnight at our separate doors the way we always did. But when I got inside and sat on the edge of my bed in the quiet, I could not shake the feeling that sat in my chest. It was not worry exactly, it was not discomfort. It was something closer to awareness, like a door had opened just slightly, just enough for a sliver of light to come through, and I was standing on my side of it, not sure whether I wanted to open it further or press my back against it and pretend I had never seen the light at all. I tried to figure out why Colton's question had bothered me. Not because it was unfair. It was not unfair, it was a little strange maybe, but not unfair. What bothered me was something underneath the question. The weight of it. The way he had not looked at me when he asked it, like the asking cost him something. Like he had been carrying that question around for a while before it slipped out. 7 years of knowing someone teaches you their silences, and this one was different from any silence Colton had carried before. I lay back on my bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Outside, the city kept going. Inside, something very quiet had shifted, and I was not sure yet what it meant, only that I could feel it, and that feeling it was enough to keep me awake long past the hour when I should have been sleeping. I told myself it was nothing, but I knew, even then, that it was not nothing. I just was not ready yet to call it what it was. The next morning, Colton acted like nothing had happened. That was the thing about him. He had this ability to step back into ordinary life without any visible seam, as if whatever had cracked the surface the night before had simply sealed itself back up by morning. He was already in the kitchen when I came out, moving around the counter with the same easy familiarity he always had in shared spaces. And when he heard me come in, he just said, "Coffee is on," without turning around. I stood there for a second, watching his back, trying to read something in the line of his shoulders or the way he was holding himself. There was nothing obvious. He was just Colton, making coffee on a Wednesday morning, completely unbothered on the outside. I sat down and he slid a mug across to me a minute later. 1 sugar, the right amount of milk, exactly how I always had it. I wrapped my hands around the mug and looked at him, and he finally glanced up and raised an eyebrow. "What?" And I shook my head. "Nothing," and we dropped into the normal rhythm of a weekday morning. Papers, class schedules, the particular kind of comfortable silence that had always lived between us. Except this morning the silence felt different. Not hostile, not loaded with anything obvious. Just slightly off, the way a song sounds when one instrument is tuned just barely wrong. You might not catch it immediately, but something in you registers the discord before your brain names it. I did not bring up the rooftop. He did not bring up the rooftop. We both moved around it like it was furniture placed in the middle of a room, acknowledging it by how carefully we avoided it. Weston called around noon about some class notes I had promised to send over. It was a short call, 2 minutes at most, and I was laughing at something he said near the end of it. Some joke about our professor's habit of repeating the same example 3 times in a row in slightly different words. When I ended the call and looked up, Colton was across the room, leaning against the bookshelf with his arms loosely crossed, watching me with an expression that lasted only a moment before he rearranged it into something neutral. "That was Weston," I said. "Not as an explanation, just as a statement." "Figured," he said. I waited to see if there was anything after that. There was not. He pushed off the bookshelf and went back to whatever he had been doing at his desk, and I sat there with my phone still in my hand, feeling something low and unresolved in the space between us that I could not name and could not dismiss. The group project changed things in a way I had not anticipated. It was assigned that same week a semester-long research project split across 3-person teams, and through some alignment of schedules and subject areas, the 3 of us ended up together. Me, Colton, and Weston. I noticed Colton's expression when the groupings were finalized. It was not dramatic. He did not react visibly in any way a stranger would catch. But I knew his face. I knew the particular stillness that came into it when he was containing something he did not want to show. He was professional through every meeting. Focused, prepared, reliable. All the things Colton always was when something required his attention. He engaged with the work directly. He answered Weston's questions without edge. On the surface, anyone watching would have seen three people doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. But I was not just watching the surface. I saw the way he never initiated conversation with Weston, only responded when necessary. I saw how when Weston and I got sidetracked by something funny, some reference we both recognized, some shared tangent, Colton would find a reason to step away, getting water, checking something on his phone, needing to print a page. Always something reasonable, always something that meant he was briefly not in the room for the moments when Weston and I were easy with each other. It was careful, too careful to be accidental. Weston noticed. Of course he noticed. Weston was perceptive in the understated way that some people are. The kind of perceptive that does not announce itself but catches everything. He brought it up one afternoon when Colton had stepped out during a meeting, some errand. 3 minutes, maybe 5. Weston leaned back in his chair and looked at me and said, simply and without drama, "He does not like me. He is just like that with new people." I said, "Takes him time." Weston tilted his head slightly. "It is not about me, Roger." I did not respond to that. "He is not unfriendly in general," Weston continued, picking his words carefully. "He is specifically uncomfortable when you and I are in the same space. That is a different thing from being reserved." I looked at the door Colton had walked out of. "You are reading into it." "Maybe," Weston said, in the tone of someone who did not actually believe the maybe. Colton came back 30 seconds later, and the conversation closed. But Weston's observation sat in the back of my mind for the rest of that afternoon, and followed me home and stayed with me through dinner and into the late hours of the evening, when I should have been working through the project outline, but was instead sitting at my desk staring at a blank document. It is not about me. What did that mean? What was it about then? I had my own answer forming. Had been forming it for days now, assembling itself out of small pieces whether I wanted it to or not, but putting it into clear thought felt like crossing a line I was not sure I could uncross. That night, later than either of us usually stayed up, I heard a quiet knock on my door. Not the kind that expects a formal response, the kind that is more notification than request. The knock Colton had always done before walking in, the shorthand between us that meant "it is just me." He came in, sat on the floor with his back against my bed the way he used to do in freshman year when we were both too wired from late night studying to sleep, and did not say anything for a while. I turned my chair around and watched him. He was looking at his hands. Eventually he said without looking up, "Do you think people can want things for years without saying anything?" It was not a casual question. The way he asked it, quiet, deliberate, like he had shaped it carefully before letting it out, told me that depends on what they are afraid of. I said. He nodded slowly, still not looking at me. What if saying it changes everything? What if not saying it already is? He finally looked up, just for a moment, just long enough for something to cross his face that was honest and unguarded in a way I had not seen on him before. Then he looked away again and stood up and said, "Good night, Roger," as if none of it had happened. I watched the door close behind him, and sat there for a long time after, in the silence of my room, feeling the shape of something that neither of us had yet been brave enough to name out loud. I woke up the next morning already thinking about what he had said. What if saying it changes everything? I had turned those words over in my head for most of the night, in between the stretches where I actually slept and the longer stretches where I lay there staring at the ceiling, aware of the walls between our two rooms, aware in a way I had never been before that Colton was just on the other side of them. I had lived beside him for years. That proximity had never felt weighted before. Now it did. Now every small, ordinary fact about our shared space felt like it meant something, and I did not know what to do with that. I got up before he did for once. I made coffee, 1 sugar for me, black for him, the way he always took it, and I sat at the kitchen counter and told myself very clearly that I was not going to make this into something it was not, that I was reading too deep into a conversation that was vague enough to mean several different things. That I was a person who had managed to be friends with Colton Gray for 7 years without complicating it, and one rooftop conversation and one late-night question were not going to undo that. Colton came out 20 minutes later, saw the coffee already made and paused for just a half second before sitting down across from me. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at it, not at me. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "Enough," he said. That was the whole conversation. We drank our coffee in the kind of quiet that had always been easy between us and now had something threaded through it, something thin and taut, like a wire pulled just slightly past comfortable. Neither of us mentioned the night before. Neither of us reached for it. We moved through the morning the same way we had moved through the previous one, carefully, precisely, both of us maintaining the shape of normal by unspoken agreement. I think we were both buying time. I just did not know yet what for. Weston and I had plans that afternoon. Not anything significant, just finishing up the preliminary research for the project, using one of the library's group study rooms because they had better monitors and quieter corners. I told Colton when I was leaving. He was at his desk, headphones around his neck, a book open in front of him. He glanced up and said, "Okay," and looked back down. I hesitated at the door for a moment. I am not sure what I was waiting for. Something, maybe, some small indication that the previous night existed and that we were going to deal with it eventually rather than bury it. But he just kept his eyes on the page, and I left. The library session was straightforward. Weston was organized and thorough, good to work with, and we got through a solid portion of the outline in about 2 hours. The work was easy to focus on. It was only the quiet moments when one of us was reading and the other had nothing to do that my mind drifted back to Colton, to the question he had asked me in the dark of my room, to the expression on his face in that brief unguarded moment before he had shut it down and walked out. Near the end of the session, Weston stood up to grab something from his bag on the other side of the table and knocked a folder off the edge. We both reached for it at the same time. His hand landed over mine for a second, completely accidental, the automatic reflex of two people reaching for the same thing, and we both pulled back immediately, slightly awkward, both half laughing about it the way you do when something is entirely meaningless but still manages to feel briefly strange. It was nothing. It was the most ordinary nothing imaginable. And then I looked up. Colton was standing in the open doorway of the study room. I did not know how long he had been there. I did not know if he had just arrived or if he had been watching for more than a moment. What I knew was what his face looked like in the second before he registered that I had seen him. It was open, painfully open in the way that faces are when people do not know they are being watched. There was no composure in it, no careful blankness. There was something raw and exposed sitting right at the surface, and it was pointed directly at me, and it was not about Weston at all. It was about me and the fact that someone else's hand had touched mine, even accidentally, even for 1 second. It was about what that cost him to see. Then he saw me looking and his face closed, completely and instantly, the way a hand closes around something it wants to protect. He straightened slightly, gave a short nod that was meant to look casual, and turned and walked away from the doorway. I said something brief to Weston. I do not even remember what, and went after him. He was already at the end of the corridor by the time I got out of the room. I walked fast to close the distance and said his name once. He did not slow down. I said it again, sharper, and he stopped. His back was to me. His shoulders were set in that particular tight way that meant he was holding himself together by force. "Colton, it is fine, Roger. You do not look like it is fine." I said it is fine. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. The kind of controlled that takes real effort to maintain. I came around so I was in front of him rather than behind him. He looked to the side for a moment, then back at me, and whatever he had tried to construct was not quite holding. Something was pressing against it from the inside. "What you saw?" I started. "I know what I saw," he said. "I know what it was. You do not have to explain it." I was not going to explain it. I was going to say it does not matter. Something shifted in his expression. "It does not matter," he repeated like he was testing the weight of those words and finding them insufficient. "Weston is someone I study with," I said. "That is the whole thing, that is all of it." He looked at me for a long moment. The corridor around us was occupied with other people going about their afternoon, and we were standing in the middle of it having a conversation that felt private enough to need walls around it. His jaw worked slightly. His eyes were searching mine for something. I did not know what. "Why does it matter to you what I think about Weston?" he finally asked. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the controlled flatness, just honest. "Why did you follow me out here to tell me that?" And I opened my mouth to give him an easy answer. Something reasonable, something that kept us both on safe ground, and nothing came out. Because the easy answer was not the true answer. And standing in front of him with that expression on his face, I found that I did not want to give him the easy answer. I did not want to stand in front of Colton Gray and tell him something untrue just because it was safer. "I do not know yet," I said finally, which was honest, which was more than I had been with myself in days. He held my gaze for a few seconds. Then something in him settled. Not resolved, not finished, but settled, like he could accept that answer even if it was not the one he had been hoping for. He exhaled slowly, ran a hand briefly over his jaw, and said, "Okay, just that. Okay." We walked back to the apartment in the same direction, side by side, not quite talking but not in silence the way we had been for days either. Something had been put down between us. Not everything, not even most of it, but something honest had passed between us and stayed there. And that felt, for the first time in a week, like solid ground. I did not know yet what was coming. But I knew that whatever it was, I was done pretending not to see it. The day after our conversation in the corridor, something between Colton and me had shifted. Not resolved, not named, but shifted. Like two people who have been standing on opposite sides of a glass wall, and one of them has finally pressed their hand flat against it, not breaking through, just acknowledging the glass is there. We were careful with each other in a new way. Not cold, never cold. That was never how Colton and I operated, but deliberate, considered. Every small exchange had a slight pause in it, a fraction of a second where both of us measured the weight of what we were about to say before saying it. It was exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with effort and everything to do with awareness. I was aware of him in a way I had not been before, or maybe in a way I had always been but was only now allowing myself to register honestly. The project deadline was 2 weeks out, which meant Weston and I needed to finalize the research section before the weekend. We met in the library again, same building, different floor, a quieter corner near the back where the afternoon light came in at a low angle through narrow windows. Weston was already there when I arrived, his laptop open, notes spread across the table with the organized chaos of someone who knew exactly where everything was, even if it did not look like it. I sat down and we got to work. It was easy. The way working with Weston always was. No friction, no performance. Just two people moving through a task efficiently. About an hour in, he leaned back in his chair and stretched his arms above his head and said, without particular weight, "You seem more here today." I glanced at him. "What does that mean?" "Last few sessions you were half somewhere else," he said simply. "Today you are actually in the room." I did not know how to answer that, so I did not. I looked back at my screen and said, "We should get through the secondary sources before 5. Weston accepted the redirect without comment. That was one of the things I had come to genuinely appreciate about him. He knew when to press and when to let something sit. He never needed to win a moment. He just moved with whatever the conversation was doing. We worked through the afternoon steadily. The library filled and thinned around us the way it always did on weekdays, students cycling through in waves between classes, the ambient noise rising and falling. At some point I went to get water from the fountain near the entrance, and on the way back I passed an open study room where two people were arguing quietly over a laptop, and I thought about Colton sitting alone in our apartment working through whatever he was working through, and I felt the pull of that thought in a way that was harder than usual to set aside. I sat back down across from Weston. He was highlighting something in his printed notes, not looking at me. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You are going to anyway," he said, which was fair. "When you said the other day that it was not about you with Colton, what did you mean exactly?" Weston set his highlighter down and looked at me levelly. "I meant that his problem is not with me as a person. His problem is with the space I take up near you." He paused. "That is a very specific kind of problem, Roger." I looked at the table. "I know. Do you?" he asked. Not unkindly, just directly. "I am starting to," I said. Weston nodded once, like that was enough, and picked his highlighter back up. He did not push further, did not editorialize, did not give me the knowing look I half expected. He just went back to his notes and let me sit with what I had said. I sat with it for the rest of the session. When we were packing up around 5:30, Weston said, without looking up from his bag, "Whatever it is between you two, do not let it stay in the unfinished drawer. Those things get heavier the longer you leave them." I looked at him. He zipped his bag and slung it over his shoulder and gave me a brief, easy smile. "See you Thursday," he said, and left. I stayed at the table for a few minutes after he had gone. The library was quieter now, late afternoon hollow, the kind of quiet that amplifies your own thoughts back at you whether you want it to or not. I stared at the grain of the wooden table and turned Weston's words over in my mind. Those things get heavier the longer you leave them. I thought about 7 years of wait. I thought about how Colton had looked in the doorway of the study room the day before, that unguarded, open expression that he had not meant for me to see. I thought about how long it must have taken to become that good at hiding something and how much it must have cost to keep doing it. I packed my own bag and left the library. The walk back to the apartment was 20 minutes on a route I had taken hundreds of times. I knew every turn, every crossing, every corner store and set of steps. I had walked it in every kind of mood and every kind of weather, and I had almost always taken it without thinking. That evening I thought about every step. I was building up to something. I could feel it the way you feel the pressure change before a storm. That specific heaviness in the air that your body recognizes before your brain catches up. I got home. The apartment was quiet. I could see light under Colton's door. I stood in the hallway for a moment, just stood there. Then I knocked twice, not our usual knock, just a regular knock, and waited. He opened the door after a few seconds. He was in a plain gray shirt, his reading glasses pushed up on his head the way he did when he had been working and kept forgetting to take them off. He looked at me and something moved through his expression, a quick readjustment, composure locating itself. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. A beat of silence. He held the door open and stepped back slightly, which was an invitation without being one in so many words, which was entirely how Colton communicated things. I walked in. His room was familiar in the way all of our shared spaces were familiar. Books stacked with no particular system, a desk lamp casting warm light over papers and open notebooks, the particular organized mess of someone who works through thinking out loud on paper. I had sat in this room 100 times. I had sat on his floor and talked until 2 in the morning and then fallen asleep against his bed without either of us mentioning it the next day. I knew this room. I sat in the chair at his desk and he sat on the edge of his bed and we looked at each other. "I talked to Weston today," I said. About you, partially." His jaw tightened slightly. Not anger, something else. Bracing. "He said something worth thinking about," I continued. "He said that unfinished things get heavier the longer you leave them." Colton was quiet for a moment. "Smart guy." "He is," I said. "He is also not the point." Colton looked at me. Really looked at me. Not the glancing looks we had been trading for the past week. Not the careful monitored eye contact of two people performing normalcy. This was direct, sustained, the kind of looking that cost something. "Roger, I know," I said quietly. "I know, Colton, and I think I have known for longer than I have let myself admit." The silence that followed was the longest I had ever sat with him. Not uncomfortable, not hollow. It was the kind of silence that held something inside it, something substantial, and both of us were inside it together, and for the first time in weeks that felt like the right place to be. He did not say anything. He did not have to. Some things have been waiting long enough that when they finally arrive, words are almost beside the point. Outside, evening settled over the city. Inside, something between us stopped waiting and simply became. Neither of us moved for a long time after that. The room held the particular stillness of a moment that knows it is significant, the kind that asks you to stay inside it rather than rush to whatever comes next. Colton was sitting on the edge of his bed, hands loosely clasped, elbows on his knees, and I was in his desk chair 2 feet away, and the distance between us felt both smaller and more charged than it ever had in 7 years of sitting in rooms together. The lamp on his desk threw a low warm light across everything. Outside his window the city moved through its evening, indifferent and constant. I spoke first, not because I had something prepared, I did not, but because the silence had gotten to the edge of something and I did not want us to lose our footing and fall back into careful, managed distance again. I had done that enough. We had both done that enough. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Every time I felt something shift between us, I found a reason why it was something else, why it was just friendship, or just familiarity, or just the way we had always been. Colton had not moved. He was listening with the whole of his attention. In that way he had completely still, completely present. "I think I was scared," I said. "Not of you. Of the part where naming it meant everything could go sideways. 7 years is a long time to risk." He exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Just that." "How long?" I asked. Not the same question I would have asked a week ago. This was not confused or startled. This was honest. This was me actually wanting to know. He was quiet for a moment. When he looked at me, his expression had none of its usual reserve. It was open in the way that only happens when someone has decided to stop protecting themselves. "Longer than makes sense," he said. "Long enough that I stopped counting." I sat with that. "And you never said anything. What was I supposed to say?" He shook his head slightly. Not defensively, more like he had asked himself the same question many times and never found a satisfying answer. You were the person I would have gone to with something like this. You were the person I talked to about everything. Except this was about you, so the simplicity of that landed in a way I had not expected. The quiet logic of it. The particular loneliness of caring about someone so specifically that they are the one person you cannot go to with the weight of it. That sounds exhausting, I said. It was, he said, and there was something slightly wry at the edge of it. You are very difficult to be in the same room with, for the record. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Noted. He looked at me for a long moment. The wry thing softened out of his expression, and what replaced it was something quieter, something that did not have a performance in it at all. When Weston showed up, he said, it was not that I disliked him. I want to be honest about that. It was that watching you be easy with someone new made me feel something I did not know how to manage. And I handled it badly. You were not terrible about it, I said. I was not great, he said. No, I agreed, but I understand it better now. He nodded. He was looking at his hands again, and I recognized the gesture. This was what Colton did when he was moving through something internally, working towards something he was not quite ready to put into words yet. I had seen it in him for years without knowing what to do with it. Now I just waited. I had learned over this last difficult clarifying week that Colton Gray moved at his own pace, and the right thing to do was give him the space to get there. When he looked up, he was closer than I had registered him moving. He had shifted forward on the edge of the bed, closing the gap between where he was sitting and where I was, and I had not noticed it happening until it had already happened. That was very like him. He moved without announcement, without making it into an event, simply adjusting the space between us as a matter of fact. He was close enough now that I could see the slight tension in the line of his jaw and the way his eyes were moving across my face like he was reading something and checking it twice. I need to tell you something, he said, quietly, directly. Then tell me. I do not want to just be this to you, he said. Whatever version of this we land on, I do not want to be the thing you settled into because the moment required it. I have cared about you for a long time, Roger. That is not a small thing for me, and I am not interested in pretending it is. There it was, clear and honest and nothing held back. Colton Gray, who had been containing this for years, saying it plainly and without armor, and trusting me with the weight of it. I thought about every morning he had made my coffee exactly right. Every evening he had shown up without announcement when I needed company. Every time he had paid attention to the small details of who I was, because those things mattered to him, because I mattered to him, not as a general person in his life, but as a specific irreplaceable one. I had been held carefully by someone for 7 years and called it friendship, because friendship was the word I had the courage to use. I know it is not small, I said. It has never been small, Colton. I just did not let myself understand what it actually was. He held my gaze. And now I understand it, I said. And I am not going anywhere. Something in him released, then I could see it. The specific easing of a tension that had been held in him for a very long time. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, like a door finally closing properly after years of sitting slightly ajar. He let out a slow breath and looked at me, and there was something in his face that I had never quite seen there before. Not relief exactly. Deeper than relief. Something settled. He reached forward and his hand came to rest against the side of my jaw. Still. Deliberate. His thumb moved once, just slightly, along my cheekbone, and the tenderness of that single gesture after years of everything being unsaid was almost more than I knew how to hold. I leaned into it without deciding to. He kissed me. Not suddenly, there was nothing abrupt about it. It arrived the way he did, without announcement, as a simple extension of where the moment had been going all along. It was not desperate or searching or weighted with everything that had been waiting. It was certain. It was the kiss of someone who has known something for a long time and is finally standing on solid ground saying it. I kissed him back, without hesitation, without the small internal negotiation I might have expected from myself. All of that had already happened in the days prior, in the quiet of my own room, in the long honest hours of finally looking at what had always been there. When we pulled back, he stayed close. His forehead rested against mine for a moment, and we were both quiet, and the city went on outside the window, and the lamp went on casting its warm light across everything, and inside the room 7 years of careful, patient, quietly aching feeling finally had a name, and the name fit perfectly. The next morning I woke up in my own bed, but the first thing I did was check my phone, and there was a message from Colton sent at 6:42 in the morning that said, "Coffee is ready when you are." 3 seconds after I read it, a second message came in. 1 sugar. I stared at the ceiling for a moment with something open and warm in my chest that I did not try to categorize. Then I got up. He was in the kitchen when I came out, same as any morning, except that when he heard me come in he turned around instead of just calling out, and when he looked at me there was nothing guarded in it, just direct and easy, the way Colton was when he was not managing himself. He had spent a long time managing himself around me. I now understood. This unguarded version was what it looked like when he stopped. He handed me the mug. I took it. Our hands did not linger or make something of the transfer, but the ordinary nature of it felt different now. Deliberate in a new way, like the same action had been quietly reclassified into something with a little more intention behind it. We sat at the kitchen counter the way we always did. The morning moved around us, light coming in, the city starting up outside, the particular quality of early weekday that belongs to people who are not yet required anywhere. We talked about the project deadline. We talked about a book Colton had been reading. We talked about nothing significant, and it was the most comfortable I had felt in 3 weeks. At some point I said, "Are we going to talk about last night?" He looked at me over his mug. "Are we required to?" "No," I said. "I just want to make sure we are on the same page." "We are on the same page," he said, simply, and with complete certainty, in the way Colton said things when he had thought them through and was no longer uncertain about them. I nodded. "Good, good," he agreed, and that was it. No lengthy processing, no need to examine every part of it from every angle, no dramatic reframing of the entire 7 years. It had happened, it was real. We were both inside it and fully aware of what it was. That was enough. That was actually exactly enough. Some things do not need to be pulled apart in order to be understood. The thing that changed most visibly was small. It was the way he looked at me in rooms. Before, when Colton looked at me, there had always been something slightly restrained in it. Something that stopped just before the last inch of honesty. Now it did not stop. He just looked at me directly and without editing, and I looked back and neither of us turned it into a moment or made it strange. It was just 2 people who finally had permission to see each other clearly. 2 days later I ran into Weston between lectures. He fell into step beside me without preamble, which was his way. We walked for a half a minute in easy silence before he said, "You look different." "Different how?" "Less like someone trying to solve a problem they will not admit they have," he said. I smiled despite myself. "That's specific, huh?" "I pay attention," he said. He glanced at me sideways. "Things sorted out?" "Yeah," I said. "They did." He nodded, and something in his expression was genuinely satisfied. Not in a self-congratulatory way. Just the quiet pleasure of someone who had watched something difficult find its way to a decent ending. "Good. You were both pretty insufferable about it, for what it is worth." "Noted," I said. "Not Colton, specifically." Weston amended. "He was just quietly tortured. You were the one who kept explaining things that did not need explaining." I laughed. It came out fully and without self-consciousness, which itself felt like a small marker of how much had shifted. "Fair assessment." Weston stopped at the turn toward his next class. "He is a good person, Roger, serious about things that matter to him." He looked at me directly. "Do not be careless with it." It was not a warning delivered with any edge. It was just honest, and it landed honestly. "I will not be," I said. He nodded once, the way he did when something was settled, and headed off down the corridor. I stood there for a moment after he had gone. There was something I wanted to sit with. The particular fact of Weston Cole, who had come into the picture at exactly the wrong moment, who had accidentally been the catalyst for something that had needed to crack open, who had then handled the entire situation with more grace than most people would. I made a note to myself, not for the first time, that he was a genuinely good person and that I was lucky to have him as a friend. Then I put my phone away and walked to my next class. That evening, Colton knocked on my door at 9 and held up 2 takeout bags. "I ordered from the place on the corner," he said. "They had the noodle thing you like." I opened the door wider and he came in, and we ate on my floor with my laptop open between us playing something neither of us paid much attention to. And we talked about everything and nothing. And at some point he was sitting close enough that our shoulders were touching and neither of us shifted away from it. And the contact was so ordinary, so exactly what it should have always been, that I nearly said something about it. Instead, I just let it be there. Sometimes the right response to something good is to simply let it exist without commentary. Later, when he got up to leave, he paused at the door with his hand on the frame and looked back at me in the low light of my room. There was something in his face that I recognized now in a way I had not before. The particular quality of someone looking at something they care about, not trying to contain it or redirect it, just feeling it directly and letting it show. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said back. He held my gaze for a second. "Then I am glad it was you. That it turned out to be you." He said it without any drama. Just as a fact. The kind of fact you have known for a long time and are only now saying out loud. I felt something move through my chest. Not sharp, not complicated, just warm and real and settled. "Same," I said, which was not elaborate, which was not particularly poetic, but it was exactly true, and he knew it, and that was the whole point. He smiled, the real one, the unhurried one that took its time reaching his eyes, and said goodnight and left. I sat in the quiet of my room for a while afterward. Not turning anything over, not examining it, just sitting inside the particular piece of something that has found its right shape after a long time of being the wrong one. 7 years. 7 years of shared mornings and late nights and comfortable silences and careful looks and everything that was quietly, stubbornly, patiently something more than friendship, waiting for both of us to be ready to call it what it was. We got there, not efficiently, not without wrong turns, but we got there, and it turned out that was enough.